The morning my daughter got married, I was the one who walked her down the aisle. I remember how she squeezed my arm at the top of the church steps and whispered, "I love you, Dad." That was 11 years ago. I kept that memory close for a long time. The way you keep a photograph in your wallet. Something you reach for when you need to remind yourself that things were good once. Last spring, my grandson Aiden turned 18 and graduated from high school in Kelowna. He's a quiet kid, thoughtful, the kind of boy who sends thank you notes by hand. I'd been looking forward to that graduation for 2 years. His mother, my daughter Claire, had texted me in February saying the ceremony was set for June and that a family dinner would follow. I asked her which restaurant, and she said she'd let me know once the reservation was confirmed. I didn't push. I trusted her. I'm 64 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a structural engineer with a firm in Vancouver. My wife Patricia passed from ovarian cancer 6 years back. Since then it's been me, the house in White Rock, the dog, and a life I've been quietly rebuilding. Claire is my only child. Aiden is my only grandchild. Family dinners aren't just nice to have, they're what I have. May came and went. I texted Claire twice asking about the reservation. She replied both times that things were still being sorted out. I figured restaurants in Kelowna book up fast in June. I was patient. I started looking at the drive. It's about 4 hours from White Rock, maybe 4.5 if you stop in Hope for coffee. I plan to leave early Friday, stay the weekend, come back Sunday. I told my neighbor to watch the dog. The week of the graduation, I still hadn't heard anything confirmed. On the Wednesday, I called Claire directly. Her husband, Trevor, answered. He said Claire was in the bath and he'd have her call me back. She didn't call back that night. Thursday morning, I sent a text. Nothing until that afternoon, when she replied, "Ceremony starts at 2, Dad. Dress nice." Just that. No restaurant name. No time for dinner. No address beyond the school. I drove up Friday morning anyway, checked into the hotel I'd booked on Bernard Avenue, and decided I'd figure out dinner details when I arrived at the ceremony. Aiden knew I was coming. I'd sent him a card with a check for $500 and told him I'd see him at graduation. He texted back a single thumbs-up emoji. That's teenagers. I didn't read anything into it. The ceremony was at a high school gymnasium that smelled of floor wax and folded programs. I found a seat in the 3rd row. I was looking for Claire and Trevor and didn't see them until the procession started. They were seated in the reserved family section near the front, in the 2nd row. I waved. Claire glanced over, gave a small smile, and looked back at the stage. Trevor didn't turn around at all. I told myself they'd saved me a seat, and I'd just arrived too late to find them. I told myself the reserved section probably filled up quickly. I told myself a lot of things during that 45-minute ceremony. Afterward, in the parking lot, I found them near a blue SUV I didn't recognize. It was new, a Chevy Traverse, still had the sticker residue on the back window. Claire was wearing a pale yellow dress, and Trevor was in a blazer. They both looked like they'd been at an event without me for hours. Aiden was standing between them in his graduation gown, cap pushed back on his head, grinning for photos with someone I didn't know. I walked over. Aiden saw me first, and his grin faded just slightly. Not in a rude way, more like a boy who has been put in the middle of something he didn't ask to be in. I hugged him. He hugged me back, stiffly. "Congratulations," I said. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Grandpa." Claire hugged me. "Thanks, Grandpa." Claire hugged me. It was the kind of hug you give someone at a funeral. Brief, correct, without warmth. Then Trevor said, "We're actually running behind for the reservation. We should get going." I said, "Of course. What restaurant?" There was a pause. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but I felt it land like something heavy. Claire said, "Oh, Dad, I thought we told you. The dinner is just immediate family this time. It's a small place. They have a fixed table for 6, and we've already confirmed the numbers." I looked at her. I didn't say anything for a moment, because I was running through what she'd just said and trying to find the version of it that made sense. Immediate family. Table for 6. Already confirmed. I am her father. I am Aiden's grandfather. I am Aiden's grandfather. I couldn't find the version that made sense. I'm immediate family, I said. We mean Trevor's parents and his brother's family, she said. It's been a bit complicated. We didn't want to make it awkward. Trevor was already opening the car door. Aiden had walked a few steps away and was looking at his phone. I asked her when she was planning to tell me. She said she thought I understood from the beginning that it was going to be a small dinner. I told her I'd driven 4 hours and booked a hotel. She said she was sorry about the confusion. She used the word confusion as though I had misread something, as though this was a calendaring error. I drove back to the hotel alone. I ordered room service, a club sandwich I didn't finish, and sat by the window watching the lights come on over Okanagan Lake. Patricia used to say that when something hurts, you should sit with it for 24 hours before you do anything. Don't call, don't text, don't react. Just sit with it. I tried to do that. I sat with it for most of the night. By morning, I was clear-headed enough to think carefully. I am not a man without resources. When Patricia died, I inherited the full estate, including the family home and 2 investment properties on the island. 2 years before she passed, we had set up a registered education savings plan for Aiden and Respaff, with a principal contribution of $80,000 built up over 9 years. Patricia had been the one who insisted on it. We named Claire as the subscriber after Patricia became ill. I had not thought much about that account since. It was for Aiden's university, and university was now beginning. I called my financial advisor that Saturday morning from the hotel room. I asked him to pull up the Respaff. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Victor, there was a withdrawal request processed last October. Subscriber initiated the full amount, less the government grants which were returned to the CESG. Net withdrawal was a little over $62,000. I asked him to repeat that. He did. I asked who had initiated it. He said the subscriber of record. Claire. I sat in that hotel room for a long time after that call. I thought about what $62,000 means to an 18-year-old boy who just graduated and was planning to study environmental science at UBC Okanagan. I thought about where that money went. I thought about the new Chevy Traverse in the parking lot the day before. I didn't confront Claire that weekend. I drove home Sunday morning, and I stopped in Hope for coffee the way I'd planned, and I sat in the Tim Hortons parking lot, and I thought about Patricia, and about how she had set aside that money cup by cup, year by year, because she believed in her grandson's future. I thought about that for a long time. Back in White Rock, I called a family solicitor I'd used for the estate after Patricia died. Her name is Helen Chu, and she is one of the sharpest people I've ever spoken to on the phone. I laid out everything, the Respaff withdrawal, the graduation dinner, the whole pattern of the last several months. Helen listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Tell me about the subscriber designation. Was it set up as an absolute assignment or a revocable beneficiary arrangement?" I didn't know the precise answer. She said she'd find out. She called back the next day. She said the designation had been set up with Claire as subscriber, which under the Income Tax Act gave Claire full legal authority to collapse the plan and withdraw the funds. Technically, she had done nothing illegal. But Helen also asked me whether I had any documentation of the original intent, emails, letters, anything in writing that established this was Aiden's money for Aiden's education. I had emails Patricia had written to the financial advisor when we set it up, copied to me, very clearly stating the purpose. This plan is for Aiden's post-secondary education. We want to ensure his future is protected regardless of any changes in our own health or circumstances. Patricia always wrote incomplete sentences. I had that email in an old folder I almost never opened. I sent it to Helen that evening. Helen said it wasn't a criminal matter, but she believed we had grounds for a civil claim based on breach of trust and unjust enrichment. She said the case would take time and money, and there were no guarantees. She also said something I didn't expect. Do you want to pursue this, or do you want to simply protect yourself and Aiden going forward? I said both. While Helen began the preliminary work, I quietly did a few other things. I reviewed my own estate documents. Claire was still listed as sole beneficiary of my will, along with a testamentary trust for Aiden. I called my solicitor and had a new will drafted within the week. Claire remained in it, but in a significantly reduced capacity. The trust for Aidan was made direct and irrevocable, administered by Helen's firm rather than by Claire. I also reviewed the loan I had made to Trevor and Claire 4 years ago, $130,000 for the down payment on their house in Kelowna. We had signed a promissory note. The note was due in full on demand, with 30 days written notice per its terms. I had extended it twice informally and never pressed for repayment. I discussed it with Helen. She said, "That's your money." I gave them formal written notice by registered mail. 30 days. Claire called me 3 weeks after the graduation. I hadn't spoken to her since the parking lot. She called on a Tuesday evening and started with small talk. She asked how the drive home had been, whether the weather was good. I let her talk. Then she got to it. She said she'd been thinking, and she wanted to clear the air. She said the dinner situation had been handled poorly, and she was sorry I'd felt left out. She used the phrase, "felt left out," as though I'd had a feeling rather than being excluded. Then she asked if we could come down to visit. She said Aidan wanted to see me. I asked her about the respite. Long silence. I said, "The $62,000 that you withdrew in October from your son's education account, I'd like to talk about that." She said the money had been used for necessary expenses. She said they'd had a difficult year financially. She said she'd planned to repay it once things stabilized. I asked her how she planned to repay and once a plan is collapsed. The contribution room doesn't return. The grants are clawed back. The tax treatment changes. There is no putting it back. She didn't seem to have thought about that. I told her I had been in contact with a solicitor. I told her about the registered letter regarding the promissory note. I told her she had 30 days from the date of the letter. The silence this time was different. It wasn't the pause of someone choosing words. It was the silence of someone realizing something's already changed, and they were the last to know. Trevor called me the next morning. He was more direct than Claire. I'll give him that. He said they didn't have the money, plain and simple. He said the $130,000 was tied up in the house and they couldn't liquidate. I said that wasn't my problem to solve. He said this wasn't how families treated each other. I said I had driven to Kelowna to watch my grandson graduate and been told the family dinner didn't include me. So I had some questions about how families treated each other. He didn't have an answer for that. What he said next is the part I have thought about the most since. He said, "Claire and I have been managing a lot on our own for a long time, Victor. You weren't always there." I asked him to explain that. He said I'd worked long hours when Claire was young, that I'd been distant, that Patricia had carried the household alone while I focused on my career. He said Claire had a lot of unresolved feelings. He said the way they'd handled the graduation was wrong, but the underlying situation was complicated. I listened to all of it. I said I wasn't calling to argue about parenting from 30 years ago. I said the promissory note had specific terms and I expected them to be honored. 2 weeks after that call, I received a letter through their own solicitor proposing a repayment plan. $1,200 a month, interest-free, over a period of 9 years. I sent it to Helen. She responded with a counter-proposal, full repayment within 6 months, or we proceed to enforcement through the courts. We also included a formal demand regarding the respite funds, citing Patricia's original intent documentation. Meanwhile, I called Aidan directly. He was the only one in this who hadn't done anything wrong. I told him I knew about the respite and that I was working to make sure his university funding wouldn't be affected. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I wondered why Mum couldn't give me a straight answer about how we were paying for first year." I said, "I'm going to take care of it." He said, "You don't have to do that, Grandpa." I said, "I know I don't have to. I want to." I set up a new direct TFSA account for Aidan, a tax-free savings account, and transferred funds for his first 2 years at UBC Okanagan. The account was in his name only, not Claire's, not Trevor's, his. The civil claim took 7 months. Helen was right that it was slow and expensive and uncertain. In the end, Claire and Trevor settled before trial. The settlement terms are confidential, but I will say that the promissory note was resolved, and there was an acknowledgement of the harm caused to Aidan's educational fund. Whether they felt genuine remorse or simply ran out of options, I don't know. Probably both. I have not rebuilt a warm relationship with Claire. I'm not sure I want to, not yet. What I know is that I am not angry in the way I expected to be. Anger is a fire that needs fuel, and I have stopped feeding it. What I feel instead is something quieter and more durable. It's the feeling of a man who finally looked carefully at his own house and made sure it was sound. Aidan started his first year at UBC Okanagan in September, environmental science, as he'd planned. He called me the evening before classes began. We talked for 20 minutes about the campus, his roommate, a professor whose first lecture had already impressed him. At the end of the call, he said, "Thanks, Grandpa, for everything." I drove back to Kelowna in October, just for a weekend. I took Aidan to dinner at a restaurant on the water. The two of us, no one else. We had salmon and talked for 3 hours. He told me about a field research project on wetland conservation. He asked me about my career, my years in Vancouver, what it felt like to retire. He asked about Patricia. I told him how she used to insist on the respect contributions, how she'd call the financial advisor every January 1st to make the annual deposit, how she called it planting ahead. He thought about that. Then he said, "She sounds like someone who thought about the future." I said, "She was the best planner I ever knew." When I drove back to White Rock that Sunday, I stopped again in hope for coffee. Same Tim Hortons, same parking lot, same lake light. But it felt different. There are moments when you can feel clearly what a person you've lost would think about how you handled something. I sat in that parking lot and I thought Patricia would have approved, not of the legal proceedings, not of the coldness. She was a warmer person than I am, and she would have found a way to keep the door open wider. But of Aidan having his future, of that being protected. She would have approved of that without reservation. I finished my coffee and drove home. I keep thinking about that Tim Hortons parking lot in hope. Both times, the drive up and the drive back, I stopped at the same spot, ordered the same coffee, sat in the same grey morning light. The first time I sat there feeling like I'd been quietly erased from my own family. The second time, something had shifted. Not healed, not forgotten, but settled, in the way that ground settles after a long frost. What happened to Claire and Trevor didn't come out of nowhere. That's what I've come to understand. The choices people make to take what isn't theirs, to push someone out to make room for their own comfort. Those choices build a kind of pressure over time. It doesn't release all at once, but it releases. I didn't cause their consequences. They built them, decision by decision, starting long before the night they left me standing in that parking lot in Kelowna. What I've been thinking about more, though, is what I almost didn't do. There was a version of this story where I said nothing, where I drove home, felt hurt, made peace with it, and told myself that keeping the family together mattered more than the truth. I've known men who made that choice. I understand the impulse, but there was a $62,000 hole in Aidan's future, and Patricia had put that money there cup by cup, year by year, because she believed in something. You don't honor that by looking away. Knowing what is right isn't enough on its own. I had to be willing to act on it even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant calling my only daughter and having a conversation I would have given almost anything to avoid. That kind of clarity, knowing what you owe the people who are counting on you and having the nerve to stand behind it, is something I didn't fully understand until I was in my 60s. I wish I'd understood it sooner. And then there's Aidan. He didn't ask for any of this. He just showed up to his own graduation in a rented gown and wondered quietly why his university fund had gone silent. When I called him and told him I was handling it, he said I didn't have to. That matters to me. A young man who doesn't expect to be rescued, who has already made his peace with difficulty. That's not something that happens by accident. That's someone who has been building something inside himself for a long time, quietly, without anyone noticing. His grandmother would have recognized it immediately. She always could. The dinner we had in October, just the two of us on the water in Kelowna. I think about that more than I think about the legal proceedings. The salmon, the way the lake looked in the evening, him asking me about Patricia, He called her someone who thought about the future. I've been carrying that phrase around with me since. It's the most accurate thing anyone has said about her in 6 years. I don't know what comes next with Claire. I've left a door open. Whether she walks through it depends on her, not me. What I know is that Aidan is in his first year, studying the things he wanted to study, and that his grandmother's belief in him is still holding. That's enough for now.